So, Josh, why did we see that big increase in 2023 in the appraised values for commercial properties?
The primary difference between 2022 and 2023 is we actually did see some sales data for industrial type properties and offices and things like that. And we were 40% under what these properties were selling for, which is huge. So we had to ask ourselves, what is it that we're missing? So we went to Marshall & Swift, which is a national recognized cost estimate company, and we looked at their schedules for commercial properties and saw that we were low compared to these cost estimates. And so we applied those costs, to our values, and lo and behold, that got us 101% or something. So much closer to market value than what we noticed. In fact, we looked at these things and saw that our income approach, based upon the data we had, wasn't getting there. On these especially industrial properties. I mean, they were selling for ridiculous amounts of money, and it had, they were vacant. They weren't buying new leases. I mean, it was puzzling, to be honest. So the major jump then, to answer your question, in the short answer, is that there was sales activity that showed that we were undervaluing properties, and we applied an updated cost schedule to correct that value.
Okay, so when you apply the updated cost schedule, then the cost values go up?
Yes. So what we found was income wasn't reconciling back to market. Our sales activity was high, so we had to figure out, okay, so what are we missing? Why are our schedules not getting there? Because we typically use, for the most part, on residential and commercial properties, a blend of sales approach and cost approach, right? We look at what things are selling for, what are our schedules, and we tweak our schedules a little bit. And it's a lot easier to do on residential properties, but it's a lot harder to do on commercial, because there's typically not a lot of sales activity in our area. That has changed. I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but we're part of the Dallas-Fort Worth MSA.
Yes.
Which is the fourth largest in the nation and the fastest growing in the nation. So there's going to be more sales activity here now, not just for residential, but for commercial as well. So sales values are, again, with commercial properties, there's typically not a lot of sales activity.
Right.
Right. So it's hard for us to know the gaps. And we have updated our schedule. We've used Marshall & Swift for years, but we haven't updated our commercial schedules much in the past years, because that would raise our value significantly, as we saw.
Right.
Right. So we were like, okay, I don't think that's our market. That's not what our market is, because for years, I mean, there hasn't been it's been hard to evaluate commercial property in Wise County. I mean, it's been low for years and years and years, and it's recently gone up because we've seen upticks in markets and things like that. So what happened was our sales, we had properties selling for more than we had them appraised. So we had to go, what is it that we're missing, right? So what we could have done is go, well, let's just put a market adjustment on all these properties. But when you talk about a 40% market adjustment on properties, that's hard to swallow, right? So we looked at what other components we might be missing so that we didn't have to artificially inflate properties to meet that market value. So we looked at our costs and realized we hadn't updated these schedules in a while based upon Marshall & Swift, based upon what it was doing in cost schedules. So once we applied those, we tested it and said, oh, okay, that's what we're missing.
So it sounds like that big jump we saw was because once you evaluated replacement costs, that value was so much higher.
We still depreciate them.
And we weren't picking that up with our market value because we just had a limited number of sales.
So what you probably have seen in that 40% jump was a lack of raising values over several years.
Okay.
And we were catching up.
There's no cap on that.
Not a market value. That's correct. Now that they have changed, the legislation came in and did that circuit breaker. So now we're talking about two different values in commercial properties as well now.
Okay.
So there's never been on residential or commercial a cap on market value. Never, never, never. Because the goal is always 100%.
Right.
But thankfully, now it would have been more beneficial if they had done it in 22 or 23.
So I'm wondering about the timing of now we're going to raise these values and then we come in after the fact and do the circuit. So
Yeah,
That's helpful, but it
it's
would have been a
probably a
lot more
response to it,
helpful.
honestly.
It would have been a lot more helpful
For sure.
in 2022.
I don't disagree with that. And you know, it's one of those kind of things, for our perspective, it was a difficult trigger to pull because we knew it was a big increase. But I don't know if y'all realize this or not, but we also are graded by the state. The comptroller sends out someone every 2 years to test our values. It's called a property value study. And so they look at our values versus what market data is suggesting. And if we fail that study 2 years in a row, school districts can lose funding. Every other year, they send people out to evaluate our methods and procedures. It's called the MAP study. So 1 year they look at our values, and the other year they look at how we actually do our jobs. And so 2023 also happened to be a property value study year. So that was kind of an unfortunate complex of events, right?
Have we ever failed that?
I don't know that we have ever failed like that in a while. I think there was 1 year that Boyd was out of margin, but we corrected it next year. It was no problem. I don't know that any of our school districts have ever lost funding that I'm aware of. Mickey Hand was our former chief appraiser. He'd done it for a couple of decades, almost as long as Monty has done that, and he did a really good job making sure. I mean, passing maps and PVS is a big deal.
So we've always been able to pass that.
We have, but we have never had market activity for them to look at, and then we did.
Okay.
Right? So that kind of was like, oh, if they come in and they pull those sales and they look at these properties and we didn't make a change, we would have failed that study for sure.
Interesting. So earlier you mentioned that, you know, if your property has a water leak or some of the improvements have declined,
Sure.
or there's a tornado that came through or something,
Right.
The value could potentially drop.
Yes.
Now, are there any steps that a homeowner, for example, or a business owner could do to be proactive
Absolutely.
and let you guys know ahead of time,
Sure.
hey, this and this have happened, I believe my value's decreased, before they get to that phase of protest?
Right. So what I would say is, if you know that your property has a condition that's going to be January 1, and it was still the problem as of January 1, then we let your appraiser know, whether it's residential or commercial. You know, if you have problems that we have to consider, then we absolutely want to do that. And you don't have to wait till the protest process to do that. In fact, it's probably easier. So if you have conditions as of January 1, I think one of the best things you can do is invite your appraiser out to come take a look at it. You do not have to wait until protest season, although you can if you want to. I mean, that's absolutely a remedy you have. But when we can see it around the 1st of January, well, that's the date of appraisal. So January 1 is the date of appraisal. So getting us to look at that around the 1st is probably best. I will say, too, that if you know that you have issues around the 1st, the best remedy for those things is an estimate to cure the problem. Pictures work, but they don't always tell us what the value, what it's going to cost.
Right.
So having that available to us, very, very beneficial for the taxpayer. Especially because if you wait till protest season, there's a limited time to get that stuff to us. So if you start on that early enough, get that to us before we send out appraisal notices, then you're good with the value. We discuss what we're going to do, and you're good with that. You don't have to worry about protesting it.
So is there some value in, I guess, waiting to improve the property until after January 1st, and then potentially you can use that invoice on the repair cost as support as to, you know, the fact that there was this condition at that time?
So let's talk about improvement versus cost to cure. One of the things that I do get occasionally from people are upgrade estimates. But that's not what we're asking for.
Right.
Because that's going to increase your effective year and things like that. That's going to increase your market value. It's not necessarily, because we hope that our effective year and effective age kind of evaluation kind of catches the age and the quality of the property. So I'm going to put in marble cabinets and doing that later. That's not going to help us. You added value for 25. You didn't subtract value for 24.
Right.
But if my pipes are busted, and I didn't get them fixed until mid-January. My roof is severely damaged, and I couldn't do it until I got my tax return. Those things matter.
So any kind of impairment
Sure.
that might decrease the value of residential or commercial property below market value
Right.
that happened before January 1st.
You didn't correct it.
And you didn't correct it. You want notification of that and an estimate on how to correct that
Yeah.
before those values goes out. That's going to be the most efficient way to do that.
Absolutely. You have more time to do it that way. Because if we file a protest, if you file a protest and we say, oh, you have conditions, we'll get us some cost secure. Well, then you have to scramble to get someone to do it and find someone who's going to get out there enough time. And you can reschedule your protest, but I mean, you only have a couple of times that you can do that without providing like sufficient notice. So
Right.
it's better to get it done on the beginning side for sure.
And how early could you start that process?
If you know that you are going to have conditions that you're not going to fix in the fall, and you can't get it done by January 1, call us.
Okay.
The worst case scenario, you let us know too early, and we're like, okay, well, is it going to be done as of January 1? We'll code your account to follow up with it around the 1st and find out.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
So once you get to that protest point, what would be the steps to take to protest and file that protest after the value has been determined, and what supporting documentation would be best to have for
okay.
that?
So typically, if your value increases by 1,000 or more, we'll send you out a notice of appraised value. So if your market value increased, you'll get a notice of, and you can file a protest based upon that, because typically those notices actually have a protest form on the back of it.
Right.
There's also some verbiage on the page that will help you file a protest online if you're eligible for that. Agents still don't have that capacity yet because it'll overwhelm our system. We can't take it, but your regular taxpayer can do that. If you don't get a notice of appraised value, you can come into the district and get a form. You can call our ARB coordinator and see if she can set you up with an online way to file a protest that way. We also have forms online. If you go to wise-cad.com, at the top of the page there's a forms. Click on that, and it'll take you to a page with a bunch of different forms. And no protest form is on there, so
Okay.
that's available to taxpayers. So you can. There's multiple ways to do that, or if you don't want to go to our website, you can always Google it. It's a PDF online. So
Okay. And so, can you just explain a little bit about the income approach to assessing appraised value?
Sure. We right now there's a few properties that we primarily use from the get-go income approach, and that's going to be mini warehouses, mobile home RV parks, of course, hotel motels. There's a multiplier with that. So those are typically the ones that we start. Oh, flex buildings too. We're starting to get some data in for flex industrial. So we're starting to use that approach to value from the get-go there as well. So that essentially the way to calculate a value from using the income approach is you take, and there's more than one income approach to value. I'm going to use the one we most commonly use, which is the capitalization rate process. You take your annual rent and you multiply it by your square footage, and that gives you your potential gross income. And then you minus out vacancy and collection. So, typically industries, that's going to be somewhere between 10 to 15%. And that allows for people not renting the property or not collecting it. So we'll subtract that from your potential gross income, and that gets us our effective gross income. And then from there, we apply your expenses, right? So typically, depending upon the industry, you're going to see somewhere between 10 to 45 to 50% expenses, depending upon the industry, what type it is, whether it's a triple net lease or not. And so there, we subtract that out of the effective gross income. That comes our net operating income, or NOI. And then from there, you divide that number by the capitalization rate. Depending upon the type of property. Let's say, for example, it's a triple net lease. We're not going to load the cap rate with the tax rate. Or if we include the taxes in the expense, we're not going to load the tax rate. But if we don't do that, if we don't put the taxes into the expense, and it is not a triple net, we'll load the tax rate as well. So we divide that number, and that's going to arrive at our indicated value.
And how do you come up with the cap rate?
research. We'll look at CoStar's place that we get our cap rates from. There's all kinds of market information. I do a lot of Googling. There's all kinds of some websites out there. Boulder Group has cap rates. So we're going to try to look at our MSA at the most. If we can find tax rates specifically for Wise County, we're obviously going to use those because that applies to our market. But if we are struggling to find specific for our county, we'll go to our MSA. But we won't ever go beyond that.
So are you applying the same cap rate across the board to all commercial properties in Wise County?
Cap rates vary by type, right?
Okay.
So office cap rates are going to be different than industrial cap rates. Mobile home park cap rates are going to be different. I mean, because it depends on the type of property, the amount of risk that's involved. We've done some income evaluations on post offices. Usually during the protest season, we kind of use that to support our value. But those cap rates tend to be really low because it's a pretty safe investment. So
so what would a range of cap rates be?
Wow. It could vary by quite a bit, depending upon different things. I've seen cap rates as low as 5% and as high as 10%. But they tend to be lower here than some of the national averages because of our market is
Right.
so robust.
So who determines that cap rate? Is that your determination, or do the commercial property owners bring you a cap rate?
We send out market data letters. Now, a cap rate is a particular owner is not going to be someone who this is the cap rate I know, but they may put some numbers to it. Like we have a local property owner who typically does pretty good income workups, and for his offices, and he'll send that in as evidence for a protest, and we'll use that as okay, that's what they're saying, that's local. Typically, they match back up to other stuff that we've looked at. But yeah, we'll look at CoStar. We'll examine sales. So when we have a sale price and income, right, that's part of that process, we can derive a cap rate from that.
Okay, so if I value a property using the income approach, and maybe I've had a lot of vacancy, so my income approach valuation is low,
Right.
but market value is still high, you're going to take that market value anyway?
We're mass appraisal. So I definitely have to say that. So typically on the income approach, IAAO and USPAP says market data, right? So if your property, let's say you have a property, for whatever reason, your vacancy and your expenses are higher than normal, right? We would have to look at, if we have data that says, okay, well, typically your type of property is going to have these kind of vacancy, this kind of market, and we've got data to support that. We kind of have to question, like, what is it about your particular property that's causing that to be lower? Would an investor who's calculating whether they're going to buy that property going to use your expenses or what they think their expenses are going to be to calculate it? And that's typically what we find to be true. They're going to use market data, and that's, again, because that's what they're going to buy and sell for, what they market data usually. There may be something specific about your property.
Maybe you had a flood, or there was a reason
100%, right? And rental rates, like if your property is in we talked about undesirable locations earlier. So if your property is in a more undesirable location, you're going to probably charge less rent. If you have conditions to your property, but it's kind of run down or whatever, it's an old building or whatever, you may not intend to fix it, but you're going to charge less rent, right? So those things are part of the income approach and absolutely matter.